Hi, everyone. This is Gloria, the host of the Love and the Work You Do podcast. And today I have with me John Krownapple. He is an educator, a facilitator. He is an author. He is a professor. He's a professional development speaker going everywhere. And he believes we can help ourselves and others through inclusion, dignity, and belonging. And he does that by helping organizations learn and grow in the area of human relations. His work focuses on education, diversity, inclusion, equity, and social justice work. And I'm so excited to share him with you all today. And the hope is that everyone, no matter what stage you are in life, I feel like everyone can take away from this, especially if you're a caregiver, an educator, a leader of any sort. You will definitely have a lot to take away from this conversation. And of course, I will ask him how he landed into this beautiful work that he does. So that will be my second question. My first question is that I've also learned that the best person that can introduce themselves is actually the person you've invited to an interview. So can you just give an introduction of who you are?
Sure. Thanks, Gloria. Thanks for the invitation and happy to be here. So I am, in terms of my identity nowadays, the first thing I see myself as is a father. I'm a father who has 4 children ranging from 16 to 3 months old. So, the most recent member of our family, addition to our family, his name is Owen, and he is 3 months old. And right now he's learning how to sleep while my 16-year-old is learning how to drive. And I have everything in between. So, so I think of myself as a parent because that's where I'm focused right now. And a matter of fact, while my wife is very busy with her work right now, she has a big event, a big conference coming up that she's hosting. So that's coming up next week. So before these type of events, she is very busy. So I'm trying to do all that I can to care for our little one, and so she can focus on her work. So that's where I am right now. I've been an educator for over 25 years now, and or right around 25 years. And within that time, I've served as an elementary school teacher, a social studies curriculum specialist, a language arts resource teacher, a professional development facilitator, and a coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My job title at one point was called Coordinator of Cultural Proficiency. And now I'm focusing, my professional life is focused on thinking about writing, thinking about how I can write more, crystallizing the services that I provide organizations, through consulting. And so all centered around the concepts of belonging and dignity. And so that's kind of where I am now. I went to high school in Columbia, Maryland, and at Oakland Mills High School, and went to college.
Here.
And I'm still here in Howard County for the time being. Still here. So I returned to teach in Howard County, and now I'm taking a leave of absence from my position in Howard County for an indefinite amount of time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh my. Oh, all right. But you're writing, so it's not like you're not doing it. Okay, so that's good. Leave of absences are good. They are. I've heard it's almost like a sabbatical in a way, and you come up with great, amazing thoughts by the time you come back.
Yeah, and I'm focused in on. It's a real gift to have this opportunity to focus on a child and to be there for the development and all of that. So I'm embracing that. I'm embracing being there for all four of my kids and my wife with a more flexible schedule where I can focus on my writing and my consulting work more flexibly than being tied into a full-time position. So I have up to 3 years to figure it out.
That's really
so that's
good.
what I'm going to do.
I like that. That's really good. I've always thought that was a way to raise a family, just to say. But we live in such a world that, you know, everything is done in a rush. And I guess people think they have to be like a two-income family all the time. And then sometimes that gets in the way. I think just knowing the priorities early on, that's the thing, to listen to people of experience who tell you like this is what your priority really should be, like, you know, when you're newly married, and to follow that. So yeah,
it's hard
that's
to listen. It's hard to listen because you have to go through your own journey, and you know, and that's when you really believe what it is that you're doing. Often, at least that's been my experience. I would love to be able to save people from their own unpleasant journeys, but I've found that the messy. Brene Brown is someone who I love to read, and she says that the magic is in the mess. The messy part is in the middle.
Yes.
And so when you're going through a transformation, similar to a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly, there's this really messy, disgusting part in the middle. When it comes to butterflies, the caterpillar literally digests its own body, and so it's really gross. But then they reform into something completely new. So I mean, you and I were talking before break about divorce and any type of transformative process that you go through. You rebuild yourself into something new, but there's a messy part that in my first book I wrote about it as sitting in the darkness.
And like that, the dark night of the soul.
Yeah, and then the metaphor that I rely on is removing the barriers to the light, kind of like again a butterfly breaking out of its chrysalis. The light is already there. So what you're doing is removing the barriers to the light, and you have to do that, and it's hard work, and it takes time, and all of that. But the light is there; it's always there.
Every time I want to run back into my cocoon, I'll be like, "Why are you doing all?" Why are you trying?
It feels so safe.
Yes,
it feels really, so safe.
Yes. So like, why? There was a friend I told like earlier on in the COVID. I was like, wait, this is 5 years. I tell people like 5 years I've been on this journey, and I'm like, what are you looking for? Like, who sent you on the journey? Like, who sent you on the journey? And but I find that I'm restless. So, and part of the restlessness comes from figuring out like the journey, like you have to do it, but the middle has been messy, really, really messy, but I continue to learn from the experience, and then the next me becomes better. And I feel like maybe that relates to your human relations work also. So
that's right.
That's really good. Yeah, right there was like really some messy stuff right there. We just talked about. So my other question would be, so I know, so what we also just discussed also probably goes back to your matrix philosophy of things too. But how did you narrow down to know that equity? Because it's like you really so you were an educator, you did, went through the steps that most people would go through, but I know educators who also are okay with just being the best teacher they can be, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there are teachers I love so much, and like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful, like, they didn't leave. But then their work is different. That's their work. That's what they've been called to do. Your work seems to be this equity work, which when I met you was all the buzz was about diversity, inclusion, and I think equity a little bit, like around 2016, 2017. Um, and but how did you know? Like, I'm still trying to figure out like my final work, but like, how did you know? Like, did you just wake up one day and had like a matrix moment and you're like, yes, this is it?
So it wasn't, there was a moment. There indeed was a moment, and I'll describe that to you. But now that I can look back, I can see that it was a journey all along. I of course didn't see it at that time,
Okay.
but my story of how I got here in terms of this work, really an important leg of my journey started in 2004, 2005.
Wow.
And I was in a training on cultural proficiency with two consultants that Howard County Public Schools brought in. And
as a teacher?
I've worked at the central office, and I was supporting elementary teachers with social studies. Social studies instruction. So I was picked to be in this session, and I had no idea why I had been picked, but now I know someone saw something in me. So that's a key. Is when people are providing you opportunities, sometimes they see something in you that you don't see in yourself. And that's actually a theme for me. So the person who selected me to be there, or who invited me to be there, is one person. Okay, so I think what she saw in me that I wasn't tapped into was really a direct result from my going to high school in Columbia and growing up with the values around inclusion and diversity from Columbia. And then I went to college in College Park, University of Maryland, came back to teach, and I kind of got immersed in this world of teaching children. And I wasn't as focused in on some of the, now the word I would use to call it is anti-racism. Some of the anti-racist focus that I had back then, because I was teaching elementary school. But someone invited me to be a part of this group. I did not want to be a part of this group because it was 5 full days. I had important work that I was doing with elementary schools. I was trying to get this thing called the simulated congressional hearing started, and I loved my job. I've been lucky. I've loved every single one of my jobs. And I didn't want to give up 5 days, but I was told to clear my calendar. And so I went, and within the first day, I felt a really special connection, not only to that work, but to the people that were leading the work. And Doctors Brenda and Franklin Campbell-Jones, who became my the two most important mentors I've had in my life. And I still consider them to be mentors, but I also consider them to be friends and family. So they're like everything to me. So that was 2004, 2005. Now, during a break, or at the end of the day of one of the seminars, Brenda pulled me aside and she said, I appreciate you speaking up today. I think you need to speak up more with this group. And I said, oh, okay. And I just thought, okay, I wonder what she's talking about. And she said, your voice is really important in here. I said, oh, well, thank you. I took it as a compliment. Thank you. And then the next day when we were in seminar, Franklin was telling a story about a friend of his. And I have to mention here the racialized component of it all. So Brenda and Franklin are both Black African-American. I would say a generation more senior than me. So whatever that means, 15 years older, let's just say. 15 to 20 years. And so they had been through a lot in their lifetime that I have not, or had not. They also had written at least one book, if not 2 or 3, and were becoming well known internationally for their consultant services. So Franklin was telling a story about his friend Randy, who he said, sometimes when I'm not facilitating a group with Brenda, I'm with Randy. And he said, sometimes Randy is better to respond to certain questions or certain things that come up with a group because Randy is white. And he just kept going, and he kept saying, like, he was teaching us about facilitation. So he said, and you have to work with your partner and blah, 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 blah. And he was going on. And my head, I was still back at him saying, because Randy's white. And suddenly there was something happened to me there that I never thought of or never expected, but I suddenly saw a possibility for myself in the work of justice and healing and equity and inclusion and cultural proficiency is what we were working with at that time. So in my mind, I was like, wait, go back and talk about this guy, Randy. I want to know what his story is. And it was like right around there, I realized that I always wanted to, be involved in movements that built community and broke down barriers, and broke down hierarchies, and created a new future, especially in light of our painful past, painful present even. But I've always wanted to be a part of that work, but I never had a vision for myself leading the work until I met them. And I realized at that time that the only people I really had in my mind that led racial equity work was a college professor I had who was Black African American.
Okay.
And people on TV like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton at the time. And so I'm talking right now about like the 90s, and I thought, oh, wow, okay. This Randy thing, I have to talk to Franklin about this. I have to talk to Franklin about this. Well, Brenda pulled me aside again and had a talk with me. And she said, I really think, you should get more involved in this work. And she started telling me about her dissertation for her doctorate, for her PhD. And she did her PhD on white men who do anti-racism work. And her study, she wanted to find out why the most privileged class of people in a country would try to work to end the privileges and basically the benefits that they receive, the advantages they receive. Why would someone want to work to end the benefits they receive? So that was her. And so, so she started telling me about that. And it was really, parts of it were entertaining when she would tell me the story, but then parts of it were just fascinating to me. And all of that helped me to, like we were just talking about, when you're on a journey, whether it's anything transformative, and I think of the work that I facilitate with groups as transformative, where I bring them to this matrix moment where they have to choose and then they move on to, their new future. Or whether it's like you were saying, like divorce, you get to this point where your identity breaks down. You're no longer living the life that you were, but then you have to reform into a new identity, like the butterfly coming out of the chrysalis. So in that moment, you have to choose who you are going to be. So it was around then with Brendan Franklin that I realized that I was forming a new identity for myself, something that I believed in, something that felt right, something that seemed to align with my past and who I wanted to be in my future.
Your authentic self.
Totally authentic. And it was right. And it, as you mentioned, when you reach out, I feel very fortunate because I'm doing work that doesn't seem like work. It's just life for me. It's what I'm interested in. It's what I'm passionate about. And I feel like I'm relatively good at it.
Yeah, you're good at it.
Thank you.
It's like, I've seen you in action, and it's funny because I know, everybody sees you also as a educator. But like in my head, from seeing you hands-on with what we did for the 50th of Columbia, And then, you know, taking a peek behind the scene and seeing the work he did with the school system, I'm like, yeah, he's a facilitator first. And then,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
right.
and then he's an educator second. But so yeah, I definitely appreciate that.
Mhm.
I'll take us into your new book, which came out last year, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity: The Keys to Successful Equity Implementation paper, book. So I kind of like wrote some things down. So to me, this is based on what you wrote in the book. I just paraphrased it. So it's like your book is about the struggle to implement change that reshapes academic experiences of students, um, especially the marginalized, based on traditions in schools. Um, you argue that failure is largely based on educators not considering the fundamental elements upon which education is based. Sometimes that schools and districts are struggling to get equity implementation right. But then they're trapped in that cycle of equity dysfunction, which I saw the chart and I really totally understand it. Like when I looked at the chart, I was like, this is like something happens, you hear about it, and then the news jumps on it, and then, you know, the mayor or the county executive, someone is out there talking about it, but you always know the cycle ends, and that it's almost like a show or a performance. So for me, I feel like it's the work. So based on your book, I feel like the work of belonging, we're now saying the teachers need to help. So we had inclusion, now we have the work of belonging, but like we want the teachers to help so that kids can belong. Personally, for me, I think I've just noticed that I've been struggling with belonging, is how I'll phrase it. But I might have been struggling with belonging for a long time, which is how, you know, meeting you came about. I feel like if we could equip a child early, the formative years, to belong to themselves, I feel like, you know, using your same framework, like how would I do that as a caregiver, as a teacher, you know, as a leader? Like what would I do to help that child in elementary school? Because like there are kids growing up in various places, right? Even here in the United States, and like we can talk about all of this, and you can try your best to do the work, but maybe sometimes the change could also start from, so we're working two parallel angles at the same time. You're doing your work, but we're also equipping the kids early so that by the time the work you're doing catches on, like they're not so far apart. I don't know if that makes sense. So how can we help them, you know, find dignity in themselves from an early age? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so let me answer that. First, though, there were a couple things that you said. One is about the book and about how we're suggesting that part of the problem why we don't have why we have such inequity within, you know, schooling in the United States is because teachers aren't aware of, you know, the fundamental reasons behind it. So while I believe that that's true, obviously I wrote it, I really hesitate at blaming teachers at all, because I have such admiration for teachers.
Okay.
And I'm speaking about them as a group, right, as a profession. Now, being a teacher myself, I realized that, you know, when I became a teacher, I was entering into an institution that has existed for a long time. Yeah. Not only has it existed for a long time before I entered as someone who was paid to be there, it existed while I was there as a student. So I really just returned to it, or maybe I just never left. So being that it's an institution that's been around for a long time, there are traditions, there's a culture of schooling in the United States. And what Floyd Cobb and I, who was my co-author, what we were trying to say, with that statement was that, we as educators don't have a firm grasp on dignity by design, because schooling in the United States was never centered around dignity. It was never built on a foundation of dignity and belonging. Quite the opposite, actually. The schooling has served as a mechanism for sorting and selecting the quote unquote and the brightest. So with that in mind, schooling is really centered around achievement, or doing something in order to be valuable. So we think about that, like if you do something, you are more valuable than other people, right? If you have the highest score, you feel good about yourself. You're more valuable. You might have more opportunities, and if you get into a certain class, you might feel good about yourself. So that's the type of dynamic that we're describing here. And it's not limited to schools. It's very much a part of our society where we have marketing messages coming at us all the time from all angles, from TV, from the internet, from the radio, from signs on the street, trying to sell us products. And a big tactic that's used in marketing is to persuade you that you'll be better off if you buy a product or buy a service. You'll live a more fulfilled life. You'll be you'll be cooler. You'll be more attractive. And so, we have a really dysfunctional environment that we are living in that is rooted in what Donna Hicks, who is the worldwide expert on the concept of dignity, Donna Hicks calls it false dignity, which is getting your sense of value and worth from something that is outside of yourself. Because true dignity, you have it the moment you're born. You have it because you're human. You have value and worth that's intrinsic, that is a part of your being just because you are human, just because you are living. You can't earn it, you can't lose it. But the thing that Donna Hicks also says is that even though we're all born with dignity, we're not born knowing how to honor it. And there's actually a lot of things even beyond our societal influences or the way schooling has been set up. There's a lot of influences, even biologically, that make it much easier for us to violate our own dignity and violate the dignity of others than honor it. So we actually have to learn. This is where the good news is. We can learn to honor our dignity.
Okay.
Yeah, and am I still here? I just got to zoom in.
You're still here.
Okay,
You're here.
We're still here. So we actually have to learn to do it, and that's the good news here. And so I really, appreciate what you're bringing up with children as a caregiver. How can we create a new, trajectory where not only, we honor the dignity of children, by default, but also we help them learn how to honor their own dignity and how to honor, the dignity of others. And again, what I mean by dignity is the intrinsic value and worth of all people just because they're people, but also the vulnerability that all people have. And that differs from person to person. So when we talk about the most marginalized groups of people, we're talking about people who are more likely to have their dignity violated than other groups of people. And so that's where the concept of equity really comes in, is that even though we're all equal in terms of value and worth, we're not all equally vulnerable all the time. So much of that has to do with the conditions we find ourselves in. And the traditions around exclusion that have existed, in the country for hundreds of years. So I would say, now let me answer your question.
No, that was
good
good too. Yeah.
How do we do it with honoring the dignity of children? Well, you really can't escape
them
it.
to honor.
Teaching them to honor their own dignity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I can't let you off the hook here, or anyone off the hook. The first thing I would say is, if you're a caregiver, how are you doing? How are you doing with honoring your own dignity, your own value and worth? Where are you in terms of loving yourself? Because no matter what relationship you're in, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a friendship, whether it's teacher-student, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a romantic committed relationship, if you have issues with your own value and worth, it's going to come up in terms of unhealthy dynamics in the relationship. So the very first thing with someone who's a caregiver is, how are you? Are you, aware of the ways that you're likely to violate your own dignity?
Yeah.
In a very simple way that people violate their own dignity, one of the ways, Donna Hicks has 10 ways, but here's one that I think we can all relate to, is relying on false dignity by comparing yourself to other people. So it's a very common thing people do, especially in organizations. They compare themselves to other people to say, well, at least I'm not as bad as so-and-so. Okay, I'm not, I don't have the job that so-and-so has, but at least I'm not there. Or on social media, I don't mess around with Facebook anymore for years now. And I kind of resist some of that social media because I think it's a little unhealthy with people comparing themselves to other people, or some people trying to project this image of this perfect life. And then, that's not really what's going on, but that's what you're putting out there. And then other people are feeling bad about themselves because they're not on this vacation, or they don't cook food like that all the time. So it's like a trap. It's like a false dignity trap that we fall into. And it's really easy to do. So as caregivers, we all need our own therapy. We need our own therapist, basically. We need someone to help us along with, loving ourselves. We need to be on our own journey. Then in terms of teaching children, it's like from an early age, just thinking about, how do I honor their value and worth that they came into the world with? How do I maybe resist the messaging that I grew up with that children should be seen as heard? There's so many influences that we need to break down, because those messages end up thwarting belonging. And we haven't really talked about that, but like our theory in the book is that by honoring dignity, people develop belonging, which basically is full membership. Now, whether you belong to yourself, like you're living in alignment with authenticity, or whether you belong in an organization where you perceive yourself as a full member, not as someone on a lower level than others, or someone who has to assimilate to fit in, right? Or anything like that. That's what we mean by belonging. So with with children, it's like, let's just use schools as an example again. Schools are set up to have the adults transfer, the good stuff, the learning, to students. So as teachers, when I'm working with teachers, it comes down to, how are you sharing your power with students? How are you elevating their voices? How are you giving them choices? Here's a cool one I just saw. My high school student is taking a psychology class. And she's already said, when I've asked her which classes you like, she really likes this psychology class. And I asked her why. And she said, well, I really like the teacher. Well, just this morning, I opened my email and I get the updates that their teachers send out through campus. And I opened the one, and it was the psychology teacher over the weekend giving the students a survey saying, in this pandemic situation, we are not going to be able to study all of the units that we would study over the course of a year. So what we'll do is dive into the ones where you all have the most interest. So take the survey and vote on which units are most important to you. And I just thought, okay, she's elevating student voice right there, where they have a say in what they're doing. So in that process, they're validated as important members of this community. Their voice matters, right? Their life in that class matters. They're being validated. So that's a 16-year-old example, but even, again, I'm lucky to have this range with a 2-year-old. My wife and I are talking about, how do we help her with choices as well as accountability, because also helping, and it's all age developmental, you know. It's
Yes,
like
yes,
she's only 2, so she's just figuring out what the
oh my
parameters
gosh,
are and what the boundaries are. But
that's great.
yeah, so there are a number of different ways. If
Okay.
anyone's interested in the concept of dignity out there, you know, you've mentioned our book, but
Mhm,
also Donna Hicks, as I mentioned, she's written 2
mhm.
important books. One is called Dignity, and the other is called Leading with Dignity. And
Okay.
both are really good with this topic.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we delved in to that a little bit. So thank you. That's my part trying to trying to save the world. So let me
Yeah.
see.
You know, that's what Dr. Cobb, who's my co-author, and I, we talk about a lot, which we try to help schools in particular, but whoever we're working with, um, resist the urge to try to solve the problems of the world and to focus in on what they can do with their specific environment,
Mm,
because it's sometimes a fool's errand to 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 try to attack. To It's like a mythology of riding in on a horse with a, you know, a sword and trying to slay some huge dragon and that type of
mhm,
thing. And that's just
mhm,
not how change happens.
mhm,
It's a mythology that we can buy into, or we can say, you know what, that's not very realistic. First of all, dragons don't really exist. And
mhm,
so how can I focus in on who I'm working with,
mhm,
you know? And then with the school,
mhm,
it's let's figure out what issues of inequity and exclusion are going on right here. How are the people in this community feeling
mhm,
about the degree to which they're a member? It's the same
mm,
conversation I would have in the family. You know, it's like,
mhm,
how are we doing here? And even if it comes down to, so let's talk about what we're going to do this weekend, which is a different
mm.
conversation than me saying, I'm the dad with all the power. Here is
Yeah.
what we will do this weekend.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's the thing with the work you're doing. It's like I find like you can interchange education or
Mm-hmm.
replace some other form of hierarchy with education. And I know in your book you kind of talked about that too. Like there was
Right.
talk about like nonprofit or even
Mm-hmm.
just a nonprofit organization. The same principle would work with them. And like you said, in families too. So I do really believe that you can change that. And I feel like also part of your work is like even after you go into these places and you have the conversations with people, it's now a little bit of okay, empowering the person to start the change where they are, um, and not necessarily to like I want to be the savior complex,
Yeah.
for everybody else in the world. So yeah, one every now and then that happens to me while reading
No,
the book.
happens to us all. It's very common.
Like every day, I'm like, okay, take a step back, Gloria. Take a step back. While reading your book, what did I do? Oh, so this is funny. Like I was reading on Kindle, so the pages might be different than an actual paperback. So like on page 56, um, I can't remember what I was reading about, but then like I came up with this with my own quote based on what I was reading, and someone's like, belonging. Those who have it and then those who don't both pretend that it doesn't matter. and and I'm laughing about that because that's this is what I see in the world. So like everyone wants to belong, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
some people are lucky enough that they've already found as if they belong, either because of achievement, because that's the same thing in education, in any organization, you know, what gave you the sense of belonging? And do you have the inclusive type of belonging? But if you're there, now it's almost like, I belong. So like, huh? What are you talking about? Like belonging doesn't that's not a thing. People want to belong. I don't believe that. And then
Mm-hmm.
for the and then for the rest of the world who are like, oh, I want to belong, I want to belong. I'm like, okay, all the other people acted like they're okay, like, you know, this belonging thing, it might just be me. So like, yeah, maybe it's not a thing. So that's in my head, I came up with that quote. And I know that you spoke about the epidemic of loneliness. And I feel like that's where it came from. Like it poses,
Yeah.
it's a bigger risk than obesity, and like I feel like that's what I've been trying to belong. And I don't know if it's also related to losing my identity from being divorced,
Hmm.
but that then triggered this other thing, like, okay, like I'm trying, you know, I don't fit in there. Then, you know, all of a sudden you have memories of, I probably always never fit in, you know, feeling like the black sheep. And
Hmm.
this is like really messy stuff for me. Because it's
Hmm.
like, um, you know, and nobody wants to be vulnerable to let other people know that, you know, you struggle with feeling like you belong, because they look like they have their act together. So I guess I should suffer and all of that. So I feel like hopefully with this conversation we'll be able to um, help people like me, if they happen to listen to this, to understand that you know, belonging is a fundamental human right. Like you said, it's born of inclusion, but it also encompasses like, okay, knowing your worth and dignity, um, and valuing that. It's like really, it's really tough stuff for me. So
It's
hopefully,
hard work. It sounds so simple, you know, that you have to have a firm grasp on your value and worth, but it is
hmm
so hard. You know, it's like
hmm
we have our biology working against us in terms of primitive survival type of,
mm
you know, just impulses even that we're likely to see each other as competition sometimes. So,
yeah,
but we can get over
yeah,
that. You know, we can get over
yeah,
that. But it's,
yeah.
you know, you said it's a right, and I would say it should be a right. It's a
Mm.
fundamental human need, just like food
Ah.
and water and shelter. Um, so it's fundamental. As a matter of fact, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's belonging is just above, you know, the basic needs of, you know, food, water, shelter, the physiological needs, and so it should be a right. But just as, you know, if we look at this country, you know, are those things all protected for all people, you know, all the
Mhm.
time? And I don't, you know, safety is a
Mhm.
basic need. Safety,
Mhm.
given the disparities that we have in our country and the insecurities that range from people, person to person, and from group to group, you
Mhm.
know, having the, I don't know if being guaranteed safety is really logical or practical,
Mhm.
given the vast, you know, disparities in the vast grasp on security people have. So I think it should be a right, just like I think belonging should be a right, just like I think safety should be a right, access to
Mhm.
healthcare should be a right, access to food. All of these things should not be sources of insecurity. But I would suggest at this time, you know, it is not a protected right for all people
Mhm.
all of the time, you know, where we are. But that's really what we're working toward. You know, that's where the motivation comes in, because, you know, we have a lot of growth there as a
To do.
society.
Yeah, I feel like we live in a capitalist system, and the education system kind of mimics that. Just like I said, you know, um, everybody tells you what to do, and in doing that, you fall into the trap of um, the achievement gap,
Mm-hmm.
and you go
Mm-hmm.
from the school system and then you take that to your everyday life, and it's still the same thing. It's now you, it's now so it used to be you versus the other people in school, and now it's you versus your neighbor and your colleague,
Yeah.
and then ever climbing the ladder to be up there. So if belonging matters, and we live in a system that's almost capitalistic in nature, it's so hard to balance, to find a place for both. How? I don't even know if it's a question or maybe it's just like it's like, how do you balance? I guess you just know that, okay, the world has been like this for a long time, and then you do your part, whatever your life's work is, and you do it to the best of your ability. So that's just me thinking. But I guess the question was, how do you balance achievement and belonging, inclusion in this world in which like half of the world doesn't subscribe to any of this? Like there are people there who are okay with the what's that? I forgot the, let me look so I don't misquote. This equity dysfunction.
Yeah. Well, so obviously there's a need for inclusion, there's a need for belonging, there's a need for equity, which I would just equate equity to fairness. That is, am I experiencing fairness? So there's like 30 plus years of research that shows that when people feel, when they're experiencing something less than belonging, they're not going to be at their best. They're not going to perform at their best, either at work or, in a student capacity. There's so much research on the stereotype threat, which for over 30 years has been done on so many different groups of people, and it shows there's always underperformance when someone wants to achieve, but they're worried that they don't belong and that they might actually fulfill stereotypes. And so they actually underperform when they're thinking about that, because basically we only have so much energy to give, and if we're directing our energy into worrying about this or that, we're not going to be at our best. And that's true anywhere. That's true in a social type of environment, at a party. If you're worried about whether or not you fit in, you are not going to be at your best. In a relationship, in a committed relationship, if you feel like you don't belong in it, you're not going to be at your best. The relationship's going to suffer. So it's true no matter what. And like you said, we're not necessarily set up for success here, because our institutions and our society isn't structured around it. But what we can do is we can focus on, maybe balance isn't the right word, right? Maybe it's something like, how can we get better? And I would say it's a choice every day through small actions in our local environment, based on the people that we interact with or could interact with. When people show thoughtfulness, are we honoring their dignity by acknowledging that thoughtfulness and recognizing them? I'm trying as hard as I can to get back in the habit of writing thank you notes, but it's really important. It's really these little things are really, really important. And it may be disheartening when you look at big systems, whether it's systems like capitalism or systems like racism, or sexism or whatever. It can be a little overwhelming. It can be a lot overwhelming. But if you plant the question in your mind, your brain will look for answers. And through the relationships and the people that you can interact with, at least this has been my experience, is that you start finding those answers. For instance, I was thinking about some of the weight of capitalism about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. And some really scandalous things were going on in our country in terms of, military going to war, getting kickbacks, like all kinds of things that were in the news at that time. And just at that time, I just came across a book and a speaker. And the book was called Spiritual Capital. And in that book, she was saying, you know, capitalism, it's not just capitalism. It's the type of capitalism. Is the bottom line profit, or is the bottom line adding value to humans' lives? So she described what she was thinking about as, you know, spiritual capitalism. It's a capitalism that is motivated by adding value to people's lives. So in that, you know, that really, I always come back to that book and think about, is the work I'm doing adding value to people's lives? And I think, you know, in terms of the topic, the title of your podcast, I think it's really easy to love the work that you're doing when you see it through that lens, that I am doing something that's good for other people. And in the process of doing that, I'm doing something that's good for me, something that's healthy for me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what exactly you're doing. It really doesn't matter what the job is, as long as you see how your job is adding value to people's lives. Because if you're doing something that is exploiting people, that is going to be very unhealthy for you, whether or not you see it. You could be a billionaire, and ultimately, if you are motivated by exploiting people, you will decay from the inside out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So one question is, how does one honor hierarchy in belonging so that everyone's included? It almost piggybacks on what you just answered, but I guess to also know that, okay, even though this is how things are, how do I navigate, you know, the structures that are still there? Like, do you have any studies, or have you worked specifically on that?
So, okay, could you rephrase the first part? If you're aware, I'm sorry, go ahead.
How can, okay, so let's say I'm where I work. I want to feel like I belong, but you know, I can tell every day that I don't belong. But then there are still things about the work that I love that wants me to stay there. So how do I honor the organizational structures that's already in place while practicing belonging as an individual? I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I do. It's first and foremost standing firm in your own dignity, in your own value and worth, and not losing your grasp on that. So it's a concept that it's interesting because it's something that no one can take away from you. It's your value and worth, unless you allow it to happen, you know, even in the worst of circumstances. And Donna Hicks calls it the Mandela.
Some of us don't even, for the longest time I lived without my dignity.
Like,
I'd given it away. So sometimes I wonder, like, even if you don't know. So I'm sorry.
There's so much trauma there's so much trauma in the world, and there's so much trauma that people experience at an early age, and so it's really easy to not have a grasp on your own dignity. It's very common, you know, from an early age, whether that's just by virtue of trying to live into someone else's expectations for you, or whether it's some serious trauma that, you know, that is, well, all trauma is serious, but whether it's something really awful that happened to you at some point in your life, you know, it's really, really easy. So it's hard work when it comes down to it, but that's the one thing that, that you have to do, is stand firm in your own dignity. Now that means that someone might have to choose to leave. think about your relationship with your job as you would any other relationship. So one of the ways people violate their own dignity is by not standing up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes standing up for yourself might mean that you no longer accept the abuse that's coming your way, and you might choose to leave the organization, leave the relationship, whatever. So that's just one of the ways that you would stand firm in your dignity. And it's it's hard. There's the song that Whitney Houston made famous, which is The Greatest Love of All, and she has the verse in there of, no matter what they take from me, they can't take away my dignity.
My dignity.
My dignity, and then she belts out, because the greatest love. So just that phrase, when Floyd and I were writing the book, that that memory kind of kept popping up of like,
she was onto something there.
So for me, it was like, what was she writing about? And then I wondered, did she even write that song? And then I had to research it, but it's a cover. George Benson performed it first, and it was written about Muhammad Ali. And through that lens, it makes a lot more sense, because here you have someone who refused to go to war, who just wanted to practice, his religion, Islam, and also, changed his name and everything like that. Now, the culture around him would accept nothing less than conforming, right? And the culture around him tried everything to get him to conform. They took away his championship belt, right? So they took away his means to make a living. He was no longer allowed to fight, and they even took away his freedom, by jailing. So it's like all these things that they took away from him, the one thing that no one can take away from you is your dignity.
Dignity, yeah.
However, for many of us, we have to learn that. Donna Hicks calls it the Mandela consciousness, because Nelson Mandela displayed it. And it's something that, and then once we understand that concept, we can learn the ways that we can stand firm in our dignity. And standing up for yourself is one of them. Playing a victim is another way you violate your own dignity, by, pretending like you had no responsibility in the relationship.
Yeah.
So
that's like some therapy stuff right there.
Oh yeah. And again, Donna Hicks does a good job of it. We have our own framework for dignity that is very much related, but she has some very practical, ways that you can learn to honor and your own dignity and not violate it.
And I know I saw this is the 4 capabilities that help you belong. I feel like that's really straight to the point. And I think people should, either people can Google to find out more about it, but listening, empathy, openness, and patience, I just think it's right there in front of you to see, like, okay, if you're trying to practice dignity, this is what it would look like. But then I feel like you put a name to the feeling, and so it's good to start on those 2 levels. I know that we are slowly getting to, let me see, the end of the time. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I think I hear a screaming baby.
Oh, sorry. So my only other question is, I'm gonna leave. I have 2 questions, but I have to not do the second one, since the baby Owen is crying. What would belonging look like? A culture that has belonging, dignity, and equity. What would it look like if I walked into one?
Yeah, you would see, first of all, people would express that they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel welcome, and they feel treated fairly, right? And what you would see in terms of actions is you would see people partnering as opposed to dominance. You wouldn't see people dominating one another, no matter what the nature of the relationship is. Like in a classroom, you would see teachers sharing power with students. So for instance, one of the many, many ways would be that they'd be working together to create class expectations. instead of the teacher saying, here are the rules. If you violate them, you will be punished. So you see them working together to decide on, the agreed upon expectations. So you'd see people working in partnership and building community. You'd see people repairing the harm when things go wrong, when there's conflict. And there will be conflict in any relationship. You would see people actively trying to repair the harm and to restore the relationships that they've developed. And they would have processes in place to do that. And they would be competent. People would be competent and comfortable engaging in that. There would be a certain level of humility where people can say, I'm sorry. No matter where you are in terms of your position and that type of thing. You would see, in terms of the actions that would repair the harm, you would see those reparations being made in a way that people see that if we repair the harm that's been done here, we'll have a better community. It's not a zero-sum type of mentality. You'd see people affirming one another's uniqueness and their differences. So you'd see, of course, the celebration of differences and that type of thing, but you'd see a lot of acknowledgement that none of us is only one thing or one dimension of our identity. And you'd see people recognizing and celebrating one another, and not only for who they are, but for what they do. So you'd see celebrations of thoughtfulness, and like we were talking about, you'd see thank you notes. You'd see people showing appreciation, so people would feel appreciated. And you'd see people presuming competence and positive intent. And what I mean by presuming competence, because the negative, you could think presumed incompetence. That's the effect of, harmful biases and that type of thing. So presuming competence is actually, it may mean interrupting your own biases and saying, okay, let me lend the benefit of the doubt. So you'd see a lot of people lending the benefit of the doubt, recognizing that they might be judging people based on things that may not at all be true. So you'd see presuming competence, and also you'd see the benefit of the doubt showing up in terms of positive intent. Let me assume that people are trying to do something with good intent, although it may be coming out.
Could that also be framed as, I heard someone say one day, to ask, so why do you have to do it that way? Or why are you thinking that way? Would that be a great way to approach it too? Okay.
Yeah, maybe. There's different theories on that in terms of questioning. Some people say that starting with a why question kind of puts people on a defensive posture. I tend to think it's okay because you dig below the surface in terms of why, but both people have to be willing to explore. They have to be willing to have a dialogue. Yeah. If they're not both there, the why question can put people on the defensive. However, if we are in an environment that you're describing, an inclusive environment where people have access and belonging, then dialogue would be more normal. So that probably would be a norm.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Ooh, I love that. So I'm going to let you go to Owen to dash off. But at the same time, do you have anything you're working on, or maybe some new, something that happened recently that you'd like people to take a peek at?
Oh, no, just right now, my focus is on the book, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity. It's available on Amazon. And I think even though we write in the context of education, what we're hearing from people who are not educators they are getting a lot out of the read. So that's where we're focused on right now. And I think the best way to keep up with me probably at this point is my Twitter account. I own a URL, but I don't have a website up yet for Dignity Consulting.
There's time.
Yeah, so by next time, maybe we'll see. But I would say, if you're interested in any of this, check out the book. It's called Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity, and by Floyd Cobb and John Krownapple.
Yay! Thank you so much,
and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. Have a great one.
Thank you, Gloria. Take care.
Bye.